I never thought I'd end up working for a millionaire, but life has a funny way of surprising you. My name's Sarah, and I was just a small-town girl trying to make ends meet when I landed this job as a maid for Mr. Goldstein. The mansion was intimidating, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. On my first day, I felt like a fish out of water, fumbling with fancy vacuum cleaners and designer throw pillows. But I was determined to prove myself. Little did I know, Mr. Goldstein had other plans. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I noticed something odd. The door to his study was ajar, which was unusual. Mr. Goldstein always kept it locked tight. Curiosity got the better of me and I peeked inside. That's when I saw it, the safe. Wide open, practically screaming, "Look at me!" I froze, my heart pounding. Stacks of cash and glittering jewelry winked at me from inside. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. For a moment, I imagined grabbing a handful. Just a little, he'd never notice. Could pay off my student loans, help my sick mom. But then I remembered the security cameras. They were everywhere in this house, silent watchers recording my every move. Was this some kind of test? I took a deep breath and stepped back, closing the study door firmly. As I turned, I caught a glimpse of movement down the hall. Was that Mr. Goldstein watching me? The rest of my shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Every task felt like a challenge, every room a potential trap. What game was the millionaire playing? As I left that evening, Mr. Goldstein called me into his office. My palms were sweaty as I stood before his massive desk. He leaned forward, his face unreadable. "Sarah," he said slowly, "I have a proposition for you." And that's when everything changed. Mr. Goldstein's eyes bore into mine as I stood there, my heart racing. What did he know? What had he seen? "Sarah," he began, his voice low and serious, "I've been watching you closely these past few weeks." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my face neutral. "Yes, sir." He leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "You're not like the others. You're smart, hardworking, and most importantly, honest." Relief washed over me, quickly followed by confusion. What was this about? "I have a problem," Mr. Goldstein continued. "Someone in this house is stealing from me. Small amounts, but it's adding up. I need someone I can trust to help me catch them." My mind reeled. A thief in the mansion? And he wanted my help? "That's why I left the safe open today," he explained. "It was a test, and you passed with flying colors." I felt a mix of pride and unease. "Thank you, sir. But what exactly do you want me to do?" Mr. Goldstein's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I want you to be my eyes and ears, Sarah. Keep working as you have been, but watch the other staff closely. Report anything suspicious directly to me." He slid an envelope across the desk. "This is an advance on your new salary. You'll be compensated very well for this extra responsibility." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the envelope. This felt wrong somehow, spying on my coworkers. But the thought of that money, of finally being able to help my family. "Do we have a deal?" Mr. Goldstein asked, his tone making it clear this wasn't really a question. I took a deep breath and picked up the envelope. "Yes, sir. We have a deal." As I left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that I just made a deal with the devil. But there was no turning back now. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a twisted game that would change my life forever. The next morning, I arrived at the mansion with a knot in my stomach. Everything looked the same: the polished floors, the priceless artwork, the other staff bustling about their duties. But now I saw it all through different eyes. Who among these familiar faces could be the thief? There was Maria, the cook, always humming as she prepared Mr. Goldstein's gourmet meals. Could her cheery demeanor be hiding something sinister? Or maybe it was James, the stone-faced chauffeur who rarely spoke to anyone. What secrets lurked behind those quiet eyes? I tried to act normal as I went about my cleaning routine, but I felt like a fraud. Every interaction became a chess move, every conversation a potential clue. "Hey Sarah, can you help me move this vase?" asked Lisa, one of the other maids. I hesitated for a split second. Was this innocent? Or was she trying to distract me from something? "Sure," I replied, forcing a smile. As we carefully lifted the antique porcelain, I studied Lisa's face. Did her eyes dart to that drawer a little too often? Was that nervousness in her voice? Or was I just paranoid? The day dragged on, a constant dance of suspicion and second-guessing. I found myself lingering in rooms, ears straining for any odd noises. My eyes scanned for the tiniest details out of place. By afternoon, the stress was getting to me. I slipped into a bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. What was I becoming? Just then, I heard whispers from the hallway. Pressing my ear to the door, I caught snippets of conversation. Tonight, when everyone's gone, he'll never notice if we're careful. My heart raced. Was this it? Had I stumbled onto the thieves' plan? I burst out of the bathroom, ready to confront them, only to find the hallway empty. Had I imagined it all? As I headed home that evening, my mind was a whirlwind. Should I tell Mr. Goldstein about what I'd heard? Or wait and try to catch them in the act? One thing was certain: this game of cat and mouse was far from over. And I was starting to wonder if I was really the cat, or just another mouse in a much bigger trap. That night I barely slept. The whispered conversation I'd overheard kept replaying in my mind. I knew I had to act, but how? I arrived at the mansion earlier than usual the next morning, determined to uncover the truth. The house was quiet, most of the staff not yet arrived. Perfect. I started in the main living areas, methodically checking each room for signs of disturbance. Nothing seemed out of place until I reached Mr. Goldstein's study. The door was unlocked. Heart pounding, I eased it open. The room appeared untouched at first glance, but then I noticed it. The painting behind his desk was slightly askew. I approached cautiously, my fingers trembling as I lifted the corner of the frame. There, hidden behind it, was a small wall safe I'd never seen before. And it was open. Inside, instead of the expected valuables, I found a single envelope with my name on it. Confusion and fear battled within me as I reached for it. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I whirled around, coming face to face with James, the chauffeur. His usually impassive face was twisted with anger. "What do you think you're doing in here?" he growled. I was just cleaning," I stammered, trying to hide the envelope behind my back. James's eyes narrowed. At 6 a.m.? In Mr. Goldstein's private study. I was cornered, my mind racing for an explanation. Just then we heard footsteps approaching. "What's going on here?" Mr. Goldstein's voice boomed from the doorway. James immediately stepped back. "Sir, I caught her snooping in your safe." Mr. Goldstein's gaze locked onto mine, his expression unreadable. "Is this true, Sarah?" In that moment I had a choice to make. Tell the truth about my secret mission, or play along with James's accusation. I took a deep breath. "Mr. Goldstein, I can explain everything." But before I could continue, he held up a hand to silence me. "Both of you come with me. Now." As we followed him down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of some larger plan. But whose? And what was in that envelope with my name on it? I was about to find out, and I had a sinking feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. Mr. Goldstein led us to a room I'd never seen before, hidden behind a bookcase in the library. As the secret door swung shut behind us, I gasped. The walls were covered in monitors, each displaying a different area of the mansion. "Sit," Mr. Goldstein commanded, gesturing to 2 chairs in front of a large desk. James and I exchanged wary glances as we obeyed. The tension in the room was palpable. Mr. Goldstein settled into his chair, his eyes boring into us. "It's time for the truth to come out," he said gravely. My heart raced. This was it. I opened my mouth to confess everything, but he held up a hand, silencing me. "James," he said, turning to the chauffeur, "why don't you start by explaining why you've been stealing from me?" I blinked in surprise. James? The quiet, stoic James was the thief? The chauffeur's face drained of color. "Sure, I don't know what you're talking about." Mr. Goldstein's laugh was cold. "Please, I have it all on camera." He tapped a key on his computer, and one of the screens lit up with footage of James pocketing small valuables from various rooms. I felt a mix of relief and confusion. If James was the thief, why had Mr. Goldstein asked me to investigate? As if reading my mind, he turned to me. "Sarah, I owe you an explanation. There was never any test with the safe. I knew James was the thief all along. What I needed was someone to flush him out, to make him nervous enough to slip up. The realization hit me like a truck. I'd been a pawn in his game all along. But the envelope in the safe? I asked, remembering the object that had started this whole confrontation. Mr. Goldstein smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. A final test. I wanted to see if the temptation of easy money would corrupt you too. I felt sick. All this time I thought I was doing the right thing, but I'd just been manipulated. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Goldstein leaned back in his chair. That, my dear, depends on you. James here is finished, of course. He nodded to two security guards I hadn't noticed before, who stepped forward to escort James out. As the door closed behind them, Mr. Goldstein fixed his gaze on me. You, on the other hand, have proven yourself loyal and resourceful. I have a proposition for you, Sarah. One that could change your life forever. I hesitated, remembering how his last proposition had turned out. But as I looked around at the high-tech room, at the power this man wielded so casually, I realized I was in far too deep to back out now. I'm listening, I said, bracing myself for whatever came next. Mr. Goldstein leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made me shiver. Sarah, what I'm about to offer you is not just a job. It's a gateway to a world you've only dreamed of. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, both intrigued and wary. What exactly are you proposing, sir? He smiled, a shark-like grin that did nothing to ease my nerves. I want you to become my protégé, to learn the ins and outs of my business empire, to help me manage certain delicate situations. My mind reeled. This was so far beyond what I'd expected. But sir, I'm just a maid. I don't know anything about business or dash. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. You're far more than just a maid, Sarah. You're clever, observant, and most importantly, you know how to keep secrets. Those are rare qualities in this world. I couldn't deny the flutter of pride in my chest at his words, but something still felt off. What about the other staff? Won't they wonder why I'm suddenly getting special treatment? Mr. Goldstein's smile widened. As far as they're concerned, you'll still be a maid. But in reality, you'll be my eyes and ears throughout the entire operation. You'll report directly to me about everything you see and hear. The implications of what he was asking began to sink in. You want me to spy on everyone? Even beyond the mansion? He nodded slowly. Precisely. In return, I'll teach you everything I know. How to invest, how to negotiate, how to wield true power. And of course, you'll be handsomely compensated. As if on cue, he slid a piece of paper across the desk. I glanced down and my jaw dropped. The number written there was more money than I'd ever imagined possessing. That would be your annual salary, he said casually, plus bonuses for particularly valuable information. My head spun. With that kind of money, I could pay off my debts, help my family, secure my future. But at what cost? I don't know what to say, I stammered. Mr. Goldstein's expression turned serious. Think carefully, Sarah. This offer won't come twice. But remember, once you're in, there's no going back. You'll be part of my world completely. I stared at the salary offer, then looked back at Mr. Goldstein's expectant face. In that moment, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. Down one path lay the safe, familiar life I'd always known. Down the other, a world of wealth, power, and danger I could scarcely imagine. Can I have some time to think about it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Goldstein nodded, but his eyes were cold. You have until tomorrow morning. Choose wisely, Sarah. Your future depends on it. As I left the hidden room on shaky legs, I knew that no matter what I decided, my life would never be the same again. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as Mr. Goldstein's offer echoed in my mind. The promise of wealth and power was tempting, but the price? Could I really live with myself as a professional spy and manipulator? As dawn broke, I found myself walking along the beach near my small apartment. The sound of the waves usually calmed me, but today it felt like a countdown to my impending choice. I thought about my family, my overworked mom, my little sister dreaming of college. With Mr. Goldstein's money, I could change their lives overnight. But would they even recognize the person I'd become? Then there was the thrill of it all. Part of me, a part one barely recognized, craved the excitement and danger of Mr. Goldstein's world. To be more than just a maid, to have real power. But at what cost? Every choice has consequences, and I had a feeling these would be far-reaching. As the sun rose higher, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to make a decision. With heavy steps, I made my way to the mansion. The grounds were quiet, most of the staff not yet arrived. It felt like the calm before a storm. Mr. Goldstein was waiting in his study, his face impassive as I entered. "Well, Sarah, have you made your choice?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. No going back. "Mr. Goldstein, I've thought long and hard about your offer." I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I've decided." Just then, a commotion erupted outside the study. Raised voices, the sound of running feet. Mr. Goldstein's eyes narrowed as he moved to the door. "What the hell is going on out there?" he demanded. As the door swung open, we were met with a scene of chaos. Police officers swarmed the hallway, and at their center stood James, the former chauffeur, a triumphant smile on his face. "Robert Goldstein," a stern-faced detective announced, "you're under arrest for tax evasion, money laundering, and a host of other charges. We have a warrant to search the premises." Mr. Goldstein's face contorted with rage. "This is impossible. How dare you dash?" But his protests were cut short as an officer moved to handcuff him. In the confusion, his eyes locked with mine, a mixture of fury and desperation in his gaze. "Sarah," he hissed, "remember our deal. You can still dash." But before he could finish, he was led away. I stood there, shell-shocked, as the police began their search. In a matter of moments, my entire world had been turned upside down once again. As the reality of the situation sank in, I realized that my decision had been made for me. But was this truly the end, or just the beginning of an even more complex game? One thing was certain: nothing would ever be simple again. The next few days were a whirlwind of police interviews, media frenzy, and sleepless nights. Mr. Goldstein's arrest had blown the lid off a criminal empire none of us had fully comprehended. The mansion, once a symbol of luxury and power, now felt like a crumbling facade. I found myself in a strange limbo. No longer just a maid, but not the protégé Mr. Goldstein had proposed either. The other staff looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. They knew I had been close to the epicenter of the storm, but how much did I really know? It was on the third day after the arrest that Detective Martinez asked to speak with me privately. My heart raced as I followed her to a makeshift interview room. "Miss Sarah," she began, her tone serious but not unkind, "we need to talk about your role in all of this." I swallowed hard. I didn't know about any illegal activities, I swear. Detective Martinez raised an eyebrow. "But you were aware Mr. Goldstein was asking you to spy on your coworkers, weren't you?" I nodded slowly, shame washing over me. "He said someone was stealing. I thought I was helping catch a thief, not whatever this is." The detective studied me for a long moment. "Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you. We have reason to believe Mr. Goldstein was grooming you to take on a larger role in his organization. You're at a crossroads now." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You can either help us unravel the full extent of his crimes, or you can be treated as an accomplice. The choice is yours." My mind reeled. Once again, I found myself forced to make a life-altering decision. But this time, the stakes felt even higher. "If I help you," I said cautiously, "what does that mean exactly?" Detective Martinez's expression softened slightly. "It means you tell us everything you know. Every conversation, every odd request, every suspicion you had. In return, we can offer you immunity and potential witness protection if necessary." The weight of her words sank in. Witness protection. How deep did this rabbit hole go? As I sat there, contemplating my options, I couldn't help but think about how I'd ended up in this position. From a simple maid to a pawn in a millionaire's game, and now potentially a key witness in a major criminal investigation. I took a deep breath, my decision crystallizing. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything I know." Detective Martinez nodded, a look of approval in her eyes. "You're doing the right thing, Sarah. Now let's start from the beginning." As I began to recount my story, I realized that this wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. Whatever came next, I knew my life would never be the same. But for the first time in what felt like ages, I was choosing my own path. The game had changed, and this time I was determined to be more than just a pawn. As I delved deeper into my experiences with Detective Martinez, I began to see the intricate web Mr. Goldstein had woven around all of us. Each seemingly innocuous detail I shared painted a darker picture of his operations. So, he asked you to keep an eye on specific staff members? Detective Martinez prodded, her pen poised over her notepad. I nodded, a chill running down my spine as I recalled those conversations. Yes, but it wasn't just the staff. He wanted me to pay attention to his business associates too, the ones who came for those fancy dinner parties. The detective's eyes narrowed. Did any names stand out to you? As I listed the names I could remember, I saw recognition flash across her face. Some of these people were apparently big shots, politicians, CEOs, even a judge or two. Sarah, Detective Martinez said slowly, I don't think you realize how valuable this information is. Mr. Goldstein's network goes far beyond what we initially thought. A knot formed in my stomach. What does that mean for me? She leaned back, her expression grave. It means you're now a key witness in what could be one of the biggest corruption cases this state has ever seen. And that comes with its own set of risks. The reality of my situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't just testifying against a wealthy businessman. I was potentially bringing down an entire network of powerful people. What do I do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Detective Martinez's eyes softened. For now, you'll be placed under protective custody. We need to ensure your safety while we build our case. As she explained the details of witness protection, my mind wandered to my family, my friends, the life I'd have to leave behind. It was overwhelming, but I knew there was no turning back. Just as we were wrapping up, there was a commotion outside the room. The door burst open, and a frantic officer rushed in. Detective, he panted. There's been a development. Mr. Goldstein. He's escaped custody. The room fell silent. Detective Martinez's face hardened as she turned back to me. Sarah, she said, her voice urgent. We need to move you. Now. As I was quickly ushered out of the room, my head spinning, I realized that this was far from over. The game had changed once again, and the stakes were higher than ever. Mr. Goldstein was out there somewhere, potentially gunning for those who could testify against him, and I was at the top of that list. My journey from maid to key witness had taken another dramatic turn. But this time I wasn't just fighting for my future. I was fighting for my life. The next few hours were a blur of activity. I was whisked away from the mansion, my home for the past year, and thrust into a world of federal agents, safe houses, and whispered conversations. As dawn broke, I found myself in a nondescript office, facing a stern-looking woman who introduced herself as Agent Carter from the Witness Protection Program. Sarah, she began, her voice all business. From this moment on, your old life ceases to exist. You'll be given a new name, a new background, and a new location. Your safety depends on how well you adapt to this new identity. My throat tightened as the reality of the situation sank in. What about my family? My friends? Agent Carter's expression softened slightly. For their safety as well as yours, you can't contact them. At least not until this case is resolved. I nodded, fighting back tears. This was the price of doing the right thing, I reminded myself. Over the next few hours, I was briefed on my new identity. I was no longer Sarah the maid, but Emily Parker, a graphic designer from Oregon relocating to start a new job in a small Midwest town. As I practiced introducing myself as Emily, I couldn't help but feel like I was playing a part in some surreal movie. But the gravity of the situation was all too real. Remember, Agent Carter stressed, Mr. Goldstein has resources and connections. Trust no one from your past life. Any slip-up could be fatal. Just then her phone buzzed. As she read the message, her face darkened. What is it? I asked, my heart racing. Agent Carter hesitated before responding. We've just received intel that one of Mr. Goldstein's associates was found dead. It seems he's tying up loose ends. The implication was clear. I was in more danger than ever. As I was led to a waiting car, my mind whirled with questions. How had I gone from being a simple maid to a key witness in a deadly game of cat and mouse? And more importantly, how was I going to survive this? The car pulled away, carrying me towards my new life as Emily Parker. As I watched the familiar landscapes of my old life fade away, I made a silent vow. I would survive this. I would see justice done. And someday, somehow, I would reclaim my life. But for now, Sarah was gone. Emily Parker's story was just beginning, and I had a feeling it would be far from simple. The game had changed once again, and this time the stakes were life and death.